These two guys are very organized. They did a good job. Now, I can't wear my hat in here because somebody made a rule way back when that you can't wear a hat in a church. But most people don't know who I am if I don't have my hat on. And sometimes I've come to without the hat, and they said, "You're not Steve Ray. Go back and get your hat and come back." But I do have the hat. I just can't wear it in here. So I normally don't dress like this, but I just came straight from the airport to here. I was supposed to have time at the hotel, but the flights were delayed, and I came right straight here. I just got here a half hour ago. And I actually feel like this guy right here. I just got back from South Carolina giving talks at midnight last night. Slept for a little bit, went to the airport, and I've been in the airport and actually all day long with airports and airplanes and driving here. And I'm 3 hours different than you. So really it's like 11 o'clock here for me. So I kind of feel like this guy, but I won't show it. I'm guilty of all the things that Rolando said, the books and all those things that we've done. And I've been to the Holy Land over 200 times now. And we've led 100 groups with the same guide every time. And it's one of the loves of our life. We go about 7 times a year. Can you hear me all right? Is it clear? Okay. But the one thing he didn't say that I'm the proudest of is that I've been married to the same woman for 46 years coming up next week. And I love her more now than I loved her when I married her. And we have 4 great kids and 19 grandchildren. And all of them are defenders of the faith. All those grandkids. If you try, I always say that if you try to get my grandkids out of the Catholic Church, they'll bite your head off. And they are really good at it. Rolando knows. The kids are just wonderful. They've all been homeschooled. So I homeschooled our kids, and then our kids are homeschooling their kids, so it's kind of rolling downhill. But anyway, I'm happy to be here today, and this is a talk. It's called Swimming Upstream, How to Live a Catholic Life in a Pagan World. And our world has changed. This whole talk got started before my dad died 10 years ago. He died at 94 years old. My mom and him had been married for 73 years. And my mom died on Mother's Day of this year at 100 years old. And before my dad died, I thought, we should really talk to him about his life and his thoughts. And, we're not going to have him around a whole lot longer. So we got talking to him about his life. And I wrote their life stories, too, did a genealogy. But I just wanted him to talk to me. But one of the things that he said that really shocked me and made me think, it was the whole impetus for this talk I'm going to give tonight, which I've given a lot of times, is that he said he didn't like his country anymore. And I said, well, Dad, you're the most patriotic guy I've ever known. The flag is flying in front of your house ever since I was a boy. You never take it down. You've got a light on it. You never missed a 4th of July parade. You love to sing the old patriotic songs. What do you mean you don't like your country anymore? He said, Steve, when your mother and I got married, it was a whole different country than it has turned out to be now. And I don't like the way it's changing, and I don't like what's happening in our country. I still love America, he said, and I still fly the flag, and I still pray for our country, but I don't like what's happening to it. And I realized at that point that we are in a shift. We're moving towards paganism again. And the whole idea of this talk is that I realize there's a timeline. For the first 300 years, the early Christians lived in a Greco-Roman pagan culture. They were a despised subculture. They were persecuted. They were martyred. They were canceled. They were not allowed to speak. They were criticized. Many of them died at the teeth of lions or with a sword or with the fire. And then in 300 short years, those Christians turned the world upside down for Jesus Christ. And then in the intervening 1700 years roughly in the West, we've had a Christian culture. Doesn't mean everybody's carrying a Bible around and quoting John 3:16. I'm not saying that. But we all had in the Western world, you go to all over Europe and look at the churches. You look at the music that came out of Christianity, the universities, all of the beautiful things that came out of Christianity. And then about 100 years ago came the third step in my timeline, where somebody decided that Christianity was no longer valid. Not that they had a better idea, not that they had a superior philosophy. It's because they decided, pretty much, that science now was their God, and that was what they were going to base everything on. And they started going back to the paganism almost exactly like what the early church experienced. So the whole thing of my talk is swimming upstream, is it's how are you and I going to live a Catholic life, and how are we going to function in a world that has become, in many ways, pagan again. And you folks around Portland don't need to tell me to tell you about that. You folks have become famous in the United States over the last year or so, but my state as well, and we'll get into that. My mom and dad said to me, Steve, when we got married and started having children, if you'd have come up to me and asked me if I would have ever considered getting an abortion, my question to you would have been, my mother said, what's an abortion? She said, I'd never heard of an abortion before. And then I found out what an abortion was around 1973 when Roe versus Wade got passed. All of a sudden that became a big issue. She said, I couldn't believe that such an unthinkable thing would be allowed in our country and even become the law of the land. Thank God a year or so ago it was rescinded, but that doesn't take it away, because now there's a war in all 50 states for abortion. The one big law is gone, but now we have to fight it on 50 different fronts. And in my state of Michigan, they just passed Proposal 3, which is probably the most draconian and wicked abortion law. And they didn't just pass a law, they put it in the Constitution, that a woman can kill her baby right up to the moment of birth, and a boy can be turned into a girl and a girl into a boy at 10 years old without their parents' knowledge. This is now in the Constitution. And the other things that were in the small print are unbelievable. And yet that got passed in our state. We got a lot of money pumped in from New York and California and other places to get that law passed. But anyway, my mother would have said, what's an abortion? She said, I would never have dreamed of such a thing. Children were a blessing. Everybody I knew that I grew up with wanted to have children. Nobody ever thought of ripping a baby out of the womb and not wanting a baby. And then she said, then it became a law where it was legal, and then they expected me to pay for it. And then it's not worse, now they make me celebrate it. And if I don't celebrate it, I'm a bigot. And then the whole LGBT thing came around. And then they passed a law that said that men could marry men and women could marry women. And my mom and dad said, what in the world is that about? We would have never dreamed of anything like that in our day. Nobody talked about those things. Maybe there was those situations, but it wasn't discussed in polite public. Who would dare talk about those things? It's abnormal. It's not normal. Who would even want to promote it? And now there's rainbow flags flying everywhere. And not only am I supposed to accept it, but I'm supposed to celebrate it, especially during the month of June. And she said, we could have never dreamed of that when we were getting married and having our family. She said, and I don't like what I'm seeing, the changes. She said the most kind of outrageous thing that happened that she remembers is when Lucy Ricardo and Desi Arnaz in the I Love Lucy show were sleeping together in the same bedroom in separate beds. And it made a big national scandal of two people in the same bedroom in beds, although they were separate beds and they were married. She says, now look what they're seeing on the television. Look what the kids are seeing on television today, which is why I'm going to tell the men tomorrow, if you want to have your family have any sanity, get rid of the television. If you had these kind of people that knocked on your front door and said, would you let us come in and play with your children this evening? You'd say, no, get away from my house. And yet you let the kids turn on the TV and watch this stuff all the time. And they're being more influenced by movies and TV and music than they are by us. But anyway, this is what I realized my mom and dad were correct. And things are going backwards back to where it was in the first 3 centuries. And we are again finding ourselves a despised subculture. And we are going to be persecuted. And it's mainly going to be the issues of life and sexuality. These are going to be the issues that really confront us as Christians and Catholics, not just Catholics, but evangelical Christians and people who have a moral bone in their body, and they don't want these kind of things in our culture. When we speak out against them, you're going to be canceled. The world is going to tell you to shut up. How many people feel free today to go to the workplace route and tell them you're Catholic and be very open about it? Many of us are not, because we know we're going to get shot down. We're going to be made faces at us. And even I have a bumper sticker on my car, and the other day a guy wanted to kill me because I had that bumper sticker on my car. He rolled his window down and was screaming at me. But now there's a whole thing that we are not going to be allowed. There's no more freedom in our country of speech. There's only some people have the freedom of speech, but us Christians are no longer allowed to speak. We are told to be quiet. So looking back at the Greco-Roman world, that 300 years where the Christians were first starting out as a despised and persecuted subculture, there's some parallels that we can see. First of all, they did have crude forms of abortion, and they did have ways to take care of those issues. I'll bring those up in a minute. But they had something called polytheism. Poly means many, and theism means God, many gods. They didn't just have one. They had Zeus and Aphrodite and Apollo and a whole bunch of others. And when you went into the Pantheon, which is one of the still remaining beautiful buildings built back by the Romans, it's still standing in all its glory in the center of Rome. And when we take our groups there, I said at one time up in these niches there used to be all these gods. And they would, more gods the better, because then there's a God for everything. You can appeal to the God for anything you want. The more gods the better. And when Christianity came along, it wasn't illegal to worship Jesus, because they would have said, oh, well, look, there's an empty niche right there. Let's put Jesus right up there with all the rest of them. And the Christians said, no, because our creed said we have one Lord, not many lords. And that's what got the Christians in trouble, that they would only worship one God, and they didn't buy into the Roman pantheon of gods. And that which is called polytheism is today paralleled, it's called pluralism. Because, and I don't mean that we should not appreciate other cultures and other kind of music and other languages, but when pluralism also means that every idea is equal, every philosophy and religion is equal. And don't you Catholics dare say that you have the truth. Who are you to say you have the truth? There's the Muslims and Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism and atheism and every other ism. All of them are equal. Every one of them. You can't criticize any of these others. You have to accept them. You have to accept the validity of them. And who are you Christians to say that you have objective truth? Now, that wouldn't have been an issue 100 years ago or 200 years ago as a Christian to say we knew the truth. But today you can't say that, because polytheism has in our culture become pluralism, and like Pope Benedict said, it's the tyranny of relativism. Everything is equal, and it becomes tyrannical, and there becomes a lack of any freedom of speech. And that's what's happening in our country today. Christians were outside of the mainstream back in those days. They were pushed out. They were considered infidels even. They were considered atheists because they didn't worship the Roman gods. They were considered cannibals because they heard that those Christians went into their church services, and they didn't have churches, they went into homes, and they ate the body and the blood of somebody. They were cannibals. And they were atheists because they didn't have a God. And they were also incestuous because all those families, all those friends and people in there, they loved one another. And they twisted what it all meant. And the Christians were considered to be evil, and that's why they were persecuted. They were different, and they would not go along with the culture that the Romans gave them. So then I started to realize that we need a blueprint for how are we now going to change our world. Okay, if the early Christians in 300 years were able to change the whole world without Twitter and Facebook and Fox News and CNN and any of that, they didn't have a voice. And yet within 300 years, those Christians turned the world upside down for Jesus Christ, and then it was just a short time later that the whole empire became Christian. How did they do that? Well, you know, the Vatican and the bishops are writing documents now about the new evangelization. That's been doing that for quite a while now. There's a lot of documents and synods and things about evangelization and the new evangelization. And how many of you have read all those documents? That's what I thought. But I, one time with my bishop, he was there at a men's conference, and he had just written a document about the new evangelization. And I made a comment, knowing he had done that. I said, Bishop, you know, your document is really unnecessary. That doesn't fly over well with the bishop when you say something like that. But he understood why, because I said that the early church already gave us a blueprint of evangelization, and we know it worked, because in 300 years, look at the result. And these guys were simple Christians. They were not the intelligentsia. They were not the newsmakers of the day. How did these early Christians, who were they? Who were these Christians that knew the blueprint of evangelism and were so effective with it without even having a major voice? They couldn't build churches because it was illegal back then. If you built a church like this, the Romans would love it. They would come in and they would use it as stables for their horses. People back in those days didn't have the kind of facilities and freedoms that we have, that we're losing, but we still have. So who were these early Christians? Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, he says, "Consider your call, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, and God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong." In other words, these were just simple people, robes and sandals, not rich, not wealthy, not noble birth, not the intelligentsia, not the news media. These were the simple people, and they did what Jesus commanded. They couldn't build churches. They couldn't do door-to-door evangelism. They couldn't have open-air crusades or World Youth Day. And they couldn't go picket the emperor's palace if they didn't like his policies. They lived quiet, simple lives. So how did they have such an impact? If they went out preaching, they would end up like Peter and Paul, heads cut off, crucified. Now the big guys like that, they went out and they were martyred for it. But not everyone did that. How did they do this? They were imprisoned and executed for confessing only Christ as Lord and not the others. They did talk about Jesus and the resurrection. The average Christians did, but sometimes they did it kind of stealthily. They did it carefully. I use the example. If I walk up to a man at a bus station, a bunch of people around, and I walk up to this man and I say, "Good morning, sir. How are your kidneys today?" What's he going to say to me? "My kidneys are none of your business. You pervert, get away from me. How are my kidneys? What's that of your business?" And he'd walk away. But now let's say that's man, I get to know him, that he does have a problem, and we help him. We buy him Christmas presents. We take food over. We take him to the hospital when he needs his treatments, and we make friends with him and help him. And a year later, I'm at the same bus stop with the same man, and I walk up and I say, "Good morning, sir. How are your kidneys today?" And what's going to be the different response? He's going to say, "Oh, thank you so much for asking. My kidneys are doing much better right now. My left kidney is better than my..." And he's going to go on, and he's not going to be angry at you. He's going to thank you for asking him. What made the difference? An evangelical Protestant, when I was an evangelical preacher and an evangelist, we called it relational evangelism. You evangelize people by building relationships with them, by earning their trust. By building that relationship where then you can confide in them what's important to you, what you think is true and right, and you can talk to them. And many of the Christians became Christians because of people like that, quietly making friends and earning the right to say so. Many of you have people already that you've earned that right to do. And some of us don't exploit that relationship to the point where we tell them about the Lord and the church. They did talk about that. They also lived disciplined lives. Paul talks about how you were profligates. You were doing this and drunkenness and orgies and all. He lists a whole bunch of things. But now in Christ, you've changed your life and you're living holy. So there was a change in attitude, a change in lifestyle. And these people were noticed by their neighbors that they were no longer going to these crazy parties, and carousing is one of the words Paul used, but he says, now you have been in Christ. And the people noticed that. They cared for the poor and the disadvantaged, because the Christians, based on the Jewish and Judeo-Christian worldview and religion, they said that God made us in his image. The other religions didn't have that idea. People were basically utilitarian. They were used by the king. You were valuable in as much as you could provide to the government or the king. You weren't necessarily valuable as individual people, and certainly not when you have Rome was 50% slaves during the early centuries of Christianity. There was not the same respect for human life. And so they had this whole mentality, the Christians, that we're made in the image of God. That means that we have an eternal soul. Every single person, whether they're handicapped or whether they're a small child, whether they're blind, maybe they can't walk, whatever, it doesn't matter. If they're old and they're in bed, they can't get up, that doesn't matter. They're made in the image of God. He made them in His image, and they have an immortal soul that will live forever, and therefore they have to be treated with ultimate value because that's how God made them. And so when Christians had a whole different view of humanity than the world around them, and let me tell you right now, you folks, you Catholics have a whole different worldview about what a person is than the world out there is now adopting and putting into our laws. And because we're going to be opposing those laws, we're going to be persecuted. We're going to be the ones persecuted as soon as we start speaking out and not accepting those laws. Like, I'm going to go back to Michigan and I'm going to fight. I'm not going to accept it. And so what if it's in the Constitution? That just means we have to fight harder. But it also means I have a bullseye on my back. And that's what's going to happen. When my son, I'll just tell you, when my son was 16, he's 42 now, he's got 8 kids. But when he was about 16, he said, "Dad, I think I'm going to get some tattoos and some body piercing." And I said, "No, you're not in our house." But I said, "Why would you want to do it anyway?" He said, "Dad, I want to be different." I said, "So you want to be different by being like everyone else? Everyone's getting tattoos, and how's that going to make you different?" I said, "Son, if you want to be different, if you want to stand out and be countercultural and be noticed, be an authentic Catholic." And he took me up on it. He was 16. He had 5 friends in our parish, and they made a pledge that they were going to live virtuous lives. And they had something even called a babe alert. I know it doesn't sound good, does it? But it is. When they went to an amusement park or they were together and some scantily clad young lady came along, they'd all go, "Babe alert, babe alert," and they'd all look away. Because they were helping each other stay holy and to not to look at pornography, not to look at things that would hinder them. And they were going to marry as virgins. Men can be virgins too, you know, and they were going to be married as virgins and marry virgins, and they did. And now they have a men's group where they continue to meet together to talk about their kids. So I told them, be different. Don't be like everybody else. We have a whole different mentality about what people and the person is. The person is made in the image of God. And this is what the early Christians did. They also, because of that view of the human person, like John Paul II taught us so well in the theology of the body and his whole idea teaching us about the person and the value of the person, they did not accept abortion and infanticide, which was widely practiced in Rome. There's a letter from first century Rome from a man. It's still, you can read it today, and I just have it copied here. He was married with his wife in Rome, but he went to Alexandria, Egypt to work. And he wrote her a letter and he said this, "I am still in Alexandria. As soon as we receive our wages, I will send them to you. And if in the meantime, by good fortune, you give birth, if it's a boy, let it live. If it's a girl, expose it." What does he mean, expose it? This is what he means. When the Romans threw their unwanted newborn babies under the bridges of Rome, leaving the infants to be carried away by the wild dogs, the Christians waited in the shadows, took the children home and raised them as their own. And this testimony over a period of time won the hearts of many in Rome. If you didn't want the girl, they wanted boys. And if they didn't want the girl, they would just take them and throw them under the bridge of the Tiber River, knowing that they would be gone in the morning. This was their form of abortion, because they didn't have the scientific capabilities we have today to rip a baby from his mother's womb. They would wait till the baby was born, throw it away, and let the wild dogs eat the baby. But the Christians said, no, that baby is made in the image of God. And they would sneak out at night and hide under the bridges and bring those babies home and raise them as their own. This reminds me of Catholics today. I am so proud of Catholics. When the whole abortion and infanticide and whole thing got started, I said, it's just going to go away. It's going to be accepted. But it wasn't by the Catholic Church. And 50 years later, that whole Roe versus Wade law was nullified. The Catholic Church. And when I was an evangelical Protestant, I'll tell you, it was one of the things that made me want to be Catholic, because we as evangelicals didn't do that. We considered it the Catholic issue. Abortion was the Catholic issue. Why? Because you understood, just like the early Christians, that the infant in the womb from the moment of conception is a human being given a soul and having infinite value before God. So this is what Christians began to influence the culture around them. Now, I'm saying that our culture is a pagan culture. Some people still may not accept that. They say, well, it's still civilized pretty much. I feel like it's civilized. But I want to just make a comparison. In ancient times, many ancient times, there was infant sacrifice or human sacrifice, where humans were sacrificed to the gods. If you think that's kind of way back when, it's kind of unthinkable. Just 500 years ago, south of our border in Mexico, the Aztecs had human sacrifice. I read statistics that they think that 1 out of 5 babies were used for infant sacrifices, 1 out of 5. And when they dedicated their temple, and when I take my groups down there, I go to this temple and I give a talk about this, that the Aztecs, according to their own documents, said that when they dedicated their temple, which is under Mexico City today, that they killed 80,600 human beings to dedicate that temple. The blood was running, and they ate the hearts and drank the blood. And the name of their god, I can't say it in their language, but it is lover of hearts and drinker of blood. And they sacrificed 80,600 human beings to dedicate their temple. And there was also all the time in biblical times and cultures as well. I'm just going to give you an idea of how it was done with 2 gods named Chemosh and Moloch, which even the Israelites, Solomon himself, built altars to these gods and bowed down and worshiped them. There was one called Moloch, and if you think that they're making this up, go look at it. He's having a resurgence of popularity today in popular culture. You go look on Google Moloch, and you'll start seeing that there's a lot of people with the T-shirts and everything. But Moloch was a god that demanded infant sacrifice. He was like a big cast iron god, huge, and he had big head with eyes, where the smoke would come bulging out of his eyes, and he'd have a big hole in his belly, and they would stock it full of wood and coals and get it going, and so the whole thing was red hot. It was made of iron, and his arms were like this. And then they would have on Saturday morning, or whenever their feast day was, Moloch was the one who was in charge of the rains, and this was an agricultural society. And if you wanted your lambs and your animals to have food, they needed grass, and if you needed the wheat and things to grow, you needed rain. And so they would bow down and worship Moloch, and he would bring them the rains and the life and the prosperity. But his demand was that you have to give me your best if you want me to give you my best. And so they would gather together, and in the morning the high priest of Moloch with this metal god all red hot. You know how if you get iron hot, like what a smithy does when he's making horseshoes, it gets red hot and it steams, and you could see the heat coming off of it, and the whole thing is like that. And the priest comes up and he says, we need 10 babies today. You have a new baby, and you have a new baby, and he points them out, and the mothers bring them up, and they're grieved by it, but they're going to become the heroes of the community. They're going to be lauded and praised for a whole year because they gave their best to the gods, and they brought prosperity to all the people. So they bring these babies, and they would lay them on the hands, that red hot hands, and they push the baby down, he'd roll into the hole, and they'd incinerate the baby. But you didn't hear the baby scream because there's music and orgies going on, because it was all sexual. It was fertility and rains and this kind, and there's all the drums are going, and they're dancing, and you don't even hear the baby scream. And at the end, when the babies have all been incinerated and burned alive, then they stand back, the priest, and he says, oh God, Moloch, we've now given you our best. We pray that you will now bless us and give us prosperity. Isn't that disgusting? And yet, in our country, we still have the god Moloch. And a lot of Americans still worship this god Moloch. They've only changed his name. His name is now abortion. And don't think that abortion is not the sacrament of those people who have abandoned Christianity and have turned to this new pagan lifestyle. This is why they will never give up abortion, because it is their high and holy sacrament. And they do it because they don't want to admit they made a mistake in the back seat of the car 9 months ago, or they don't want to have a baby to feed. They want their own prosperity, and this baby doesn't fit into their life plan, and they just dispose of the baby. And if you think our culture is not as pagan as the ones in the past, think again. We just don't do it out in the open. We do it behind the walls of a hospital or an abortion clinic or Planned Parenthood. But our culture now is every bit as pagan as those cultures there, except that there's still some of you who are resisting it. Many died in the early church for the faith. When Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses," before he went up into heaven, do you know what that Greek word is that he used in the Greek language? You will be my martus, my witnesses. What English word do you think we get from martus? Martyr. And the Catechism says that some of us will be martyrs with our mouths, and some will be martyrs with their blood, witnesses with their blood. When I get to meet seminarians, and I oftentimes speak to seminarians, and when I was in India and the Philippines, sometimes there'd be 250 of them at one time. And after I talked to them, I'd say to them, young seminarians, if you're here just to have a career, if you're here just to have a way to make a living, think twice. Or if you're a coward, anybody here who's a coward, leave now, because when the bishop puts the oil on your forehead and ordains you a priest, he's also going to paint a bullseye on your chest. Because it's going to be very difficult to be a priest in the world in the coming decades. It already is in many countries. You would not want to be a priest in North Korea or China or Muslim countries. And even in our country now, one of my good friends said, I used to get off the boat in New York and people would come up and kiss my ring. He says, now they spit on me. So I told those young men, if you are cowards, I would suggest you get up and leave now. And they all stood up and they all applauded, and then they said, we're not going anywhere. We're priests. We're going to be priests. The first 30 popes died as martyrs. The first 30 popes, pretty much that's understood that when they took the seat, they knew they had a bullseye on their chest. They would probably die as martyrs because their predecessors had died as martyrs, seated on the chair of Peter. Tertullian, who was a Latin writer, theologian in the 2nd, 3rd centuries, he made an interesting comment. He said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians. In other words, what he meant is he was saying this to the Roman Empire, that when you bring us into your arenas, and you know the word arena is the Latin word for sand. When you bring us into your sand-filled arenas, the white sand, and you kill us, and the blood splatters on that, and everybody gets into kill more, into this bloodlust, kind of like kids watching movies today and video games. There's the blood, and they just kill more. But look, Tertullian said, you have to realize that every time you shed our blood in the arenas, for every drop of blood, 10 more of us will grow up from the seed you planted. That seems counterintuitive, because if I said to you, I'm going to come to Salem and we're going to start a new club, and I can pretty much guarantee within 5 years all of you will be killed for being members of the club. How many of you are going to join that stupid club? You're all going to say, get out of here, we're not joining that club. And yet, a lot of people joined the club of early Christianity. Why? Because the Romans watched the Christians die. And they said, how can they die like that? They die with great nobility. They pray to their God. They sing hymns to their God while the lions are rushing to them. Ignatius of Antioch, one of my heroes, said, I'm coming to Rome. They're going to feed me to the lions. And I know some of you in Rome have power, have a voice with the government and so on. He says, but do not stop them. The lions are my way to God. I will be ground by their teeth like grain into fine bread. The Christians knew that persecution and martyrdom would only earn them heaven. They weren't afraid to die. Augustine, he expands on Tertullian's comment about the blood of the martyrs as the seed of the church, because Augustine says, the earth has been filled with the blood of the martyrs as with seed. And from the seed has sprung up the crops of the church. The martyrs have asserted Christ's cause more effectively when dead than when they were alive. They preached him today. Not with their tongues are silent, but their deeds echo around the world. They were arrested, bound, imprisoned, brought to trial, tortured, burned at the stake, stoned to death, run through with swords, fed to wild beasts. In all kinds of death they were jeered as worthless. But precious in the sight of the Lord are the death of his godly ones. Augustine agrees that when the Christians died, that it was seed, because the Romans looked at that and said, what do they have that we don't have? Why are they willing to do that? They believe in the resurrection, not only of the spirit are going to be, but the resurrection of the body. That was a whole totally new thing. They believe in that we're one person, body and soul. We're not a body with a soul or a soul with a body. We are a body and a soul. That is what a person is. And we believe that is, at the end, the body's going to be raised from the dead too. And this was new, and the Romans didn't. They knew their gods were mythical, but the Christians had a God who wasn't, and they were willing to give. In fact, the Christians believed it so much they were willing to live for it, and they believed it so much they were even willing to die for it. And this had a huge impact. There's one guy named Justin Martyr. Martyr is not his last name. It gives you a hint as to how his life ended. Justin was a philosopher. He wore a pallium, a philosopher's robe, and he was born in Nablus in Israel, and he traveled all over Ephesus and Rome, seeking out the best and most brilliant philosophies. And then he was brought, he converted, and when they asked him why he converted, he said, because I saw the Christians die. When I saw the Christians die, I realized they had the true philosophy. None of us could do that. We die very poorly. We scream, we curse, but the Christians die with nobility. How can they do that? And he said because he watched the Christians die, that was one of the reasons why he himself became a Christian. And it happened to him. That's how he got his last name, Justin Martyr, because the governor brought him, and there's a whole dialogue that you can still read. It's in my movie, Apostolic Fathers. Because I go through these apostolic fathers that I'm talking about and how they died and how they presented Christianity in those first centuries. I filmed it all on location. And Justin Martyr, he was brought before the governor, and the governor said, I want you to renounce your Christ. Christos, deny him. I will not. What philosophy do you believe? He said, I have studied all the philosophies, and I've concluded that the Christians have the true philosophy. I can have you whipped. Do what you will. I am a Christian. I can have your head cut off. Do what you will. I am a Christian. And he whipped him, and he cut off his head. And all of his students were there, and we still know their names. And they went through the same interrogation, and they also were all whipped and beheaded. This is what the early Christians experienced. And let me tell you, if the early Christians had not been willing to be martyrs, Christianity would have died out, and you would not be sitting here today. These are the hinge figures between the apostles and the early church that eventually turned the world into a Christian place. These are the hinge figures. Had they failed to live for Jesus 100%, even to the point of dying for him, we would not be here today. They are the foundation. They pass the message on, and they're the ones, because they were so devoted to believe it, even to die for it. The Romans, they started to come into the church in droves because they wanted what the Christians had. I want to just give you a sense of what it was like to be a Christian maybe in the first 3 centuries, depending on where you lived. It wasn't in every city and it wasn't in every decade. But through that 300 years, there was some very serious persecutions, especially under Diocletian and some others, and Nero. But imagine, let's just do a little experiment here tonight. Let's pretend that all of a sudden Roman soldiers all are at the entrances of these doors and they all draw their swords. And I come up here and I am Lucius, the governor of this province. And I say to you, no, I'm not Steve Ray now, I am Lucius, the centurion. Ladies and gentlemen, you're all here tonight because we've had a problem in Salem. We've had no rain for a year and our crops have dried up, and the enemies have been knocking down those city walls and raiding our city, and things are going wrong like they've never gone wrong before, and we as a council have tried to understand why Zeus is allowing these things to happen. He is the God of all the gods, the king and father of all the gods, Zeus on Mount Olympus. Why is he allowing and causing these things to happen to our fair city? And we have come to the conclusion that it's because of you. Are you all those who believe in Christos? You are Christians, yes? Aha. How many of you went to the Zeus festival this June? You skipped the Zeus festival because you say that he is not a god. You say that this Christos is God and not Zeus, and Zeus is he's angry. And therefore he has been punishing this fair city because of you. And we happen to know you were going to be gathered here together to hear Steve Ray today. So we now have our soldiers around this room and we are going to fix the problem. We are going to let Zeus know that we're serious about him and correcting this disrespect and gather his warm embrace once again. So what I'm going to do in my great magnanimity with the approval of Rome, I am going to bring out a statue, and I bring it out here, and this is Zeus. And there are coals here in the fire, and what you need to do is take a little incense and pinch the incense into the coals, and this is your way of honoring Zeus and the Roman Empire. And you know what I'll do for you tonight? Blue light special. Tonight, when you come and pinch incense to Zeus, my secretary here is going to give you each a libellium. Oh, you don't know what that means? Well, libellium is a certificate that you are a Roman in good standing. And when you come up and pinch incense to Zeus, you can even cross your fingers if you want. I don't care. It's the act of burning incense to Zeus. And when you do, we'll give you the form, and you can take it home. And you will still have a house tonight when you leave. And your children will still be there. And you'll have a job still on Monday morning. But if you don't, well, first of all of you are sensible people. So let's get started. And by the way, this happened. This isn't made up. I put the statue of Zeus here. Now I want all of you to come, kind of like you do with your Eucharistia thing that you do where you come up row by row. Okay, we're going to start with you, young man, and your wife. Come on, let's go. Everybody come on up here. I said come on up here right now. You've got 5 minutes. Get out of your pews and come up and burn incense. Okay. I know what to do with folks like you because I met a group like you in Ephesus just a week ago. Brutus! Brutus, come in! And in walked Brutus, a 250-pound executioner with a ring in his nose and tattoos on his arm. And he comes in with a chopping block all covered with dried blood. And boom! He puts it on, pulls his sword. And now I, Lucius the centurion, say to you, you have the statue of Zeus here. You have the chopping block in my executioner Brutus over here. All of you have 5 minutes to decide which line you're going to get into. No one leaves this room without making that decision, and you have 5 minutes to make the decision, and you will make the decision for one line or the other. Let's go. Ask yourself a question. If you were a believer in the first 3 centuries and you were put in a situation like this, like they often were, which line would you get into tonight? Ask yourself how loyal you are to Jesus. Which line would you get into tonight? One time when I gave this talk, this big guy, young guy, came running up the aisle. When you're giving a talk and some young guy starts running up the aisle, it gives you a pause. Wait, what's this guy going to do? He was bigger than me. He came up and he laid his head down right here and he said, "Cut off my head. I will never pinch incense to Zeus." There wasn't a dry eye in the whole church. It took me a few minutes to regather my composure before I could continue. But boy, what a testimony. And I know that guy would have. I know him to this day. He would, without even blinking an eye. He would have got in the line of the executioner because he's not going to burn. Because Jesus said, if you deny me before men, then I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. And what does it gain a man to gain the whole world? And what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his own soul? And the early Christians knew that, and they paid the price, and that's why we're here today. And we may, in the next generation, pay the price to pass the faith on to the next generation. It may be us, because we're going right back into another pagan culture where we're going to be the ones persecuted. And I think that I'm a little bit prophetic about that. I think it's not unheard of that it could happen. There's a story. I do have enough time, I think, to do this. There's a church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem has a chapel in there built to the 12th Legion, to 40 soldiers. St. Basil, doctor of the church, preached on them. They were martyrs in Armenia around the year 320. And here's how the story goes. The 12th Legion, nicknamed Armed with Lightning, was the best and the bravest warriors of the Roman Empire. When the great Roman army was sent to fight in faraway Armenia, no soldiers were braver or more loyal than this band of soldiers. But news reached Emperor Licinius that many Roman soldiers had accepted the Christian faith. A decree was dispatched. If there are any among your soldiers who cling to the faith of the Christians, they must die. The prefect called the soldiers together and asked, "Are any of you Christians?" The 40 soldiers stepped forward and stood at attention. The prefect had not expected so many, nor the very selected ones. He demanded they deny their Christ and offer sacrifices to the pagan gods. They refused. Not a single man would deny Jesus Christ. Finally, the prefect, after much cajoling, said, "The decree of the emperor must be obeyed. I order you to strip and march out onto the lake of ice." In the meantime, fires were built along the shore with tubs of warm water to entice the men to recant the faith. The 40 soldiers were stripped of their clothes, and they marched out onto the ice in the center of the lake. They broke into a chant, "40 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown." In the night, overcome by cold, one soldier caved in and crept back to the fire, renouncing his Lord. From the darkness, their chant echoed out from the cold, 39 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown." One of the guards keeping watch over the freezing men was amazed when he saw a brilliant supernatural light overshadowing the Christian soldiers on the ice. At once he announced, "I too am a Christian," and he threw off his uniform and he cast his sword into the snow. He disappeared out into the darkness to join the 39. Shivering beside the 39 soldiers of Christ, he joined their cry, 40 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown." At daybreak, most were dead. Their stiffened bodies of the confessors who still showed signs of life were killed. They were all burned and their ashes were tossed over the ice. What a waste. 40 lives of young men with families back home, maybe businesses to inherit. What a waste of life. And yet, if I brought those 40 guys back here today and stood them in front of you and you asked, was that a waste of your life? What do you think they would say? They would say it was our way to God. We were martyrs for Jesus Christ. He died for us, and we're willing to die also for him. You saw it happen in Egypt when ISIS was there, and they lined up all those Coptic Egyptian Christians in their orange jumpsuits. You may not have known the conversation that went on there, but they asked every one of them to deny Christ, and every single one of them said, "We will not deny Christ." And they were all killed. That didn't just happen in the past, it's happening today. I want to end with 3 stories. Number 1, I think we need to educate our kids and make Christianity interesting and fun and true, which means that moms and dads, you have to be the primary educator of your kids. You can't leave it up to a school, whether it's a good school or not a good school. The fathers are the primary educators of their sons and daughters. And we need to get them away from all the entertainment world that's taking them away. And be careful where they go to university, because 9 out of 10 Catholic kids that go to university come out at the other end non-believers. My kids all made it. You know why? Because I told them, you can go to any university you want, but I'll pay for these 5. Guess which ones they went to? The ones Dad paid for. So we need to, I think we have to be radical a little bit. I have a talk I give called Raising Rebels. How to raise kids to be rebels against the culture that we live in today. And it worked, because I have 4 rebel kids and 19 rebel grandchildren. They're not rebels the way you'd think of a rebel. They're rebels in the sense that they know what's right and wrong, and they're ready to fight for it and stand for it. So one time, this was an example maybe of things we need to do. But a young man, they were Church of Christ. After we became Catholic, we spent a lot of time with them. And Church of Christ is really hardcore anti-Catholic, by the way. But they became Catholics, and they said, would you help our son Matthew prepare for CCD, to be confirmed? And I said, no, I can't, because I travel too much. My wife and I spend more time in hotels than we do in our own bed. So I said, I can't do it. My son filled in for me, by the way. But I said, I'll meet with him one time. I'm free Wednesday. If you want to bring him over on Wednesday night, I'll spend an evening with him, and I'll talk to him about what it means to be confirmed and to be a Christian, and everything he needs to know to be confirmed. She said, oh, thank you so much. She didn't know what she was getting her boy into. That night, when it started getting dark, I had purchased a Roman helmet in Rome for my movie that I made on the Apostolic Fathers, which will be for sale tonight and tomorrow. And I had also bought a sword. This is a real sword. This thing weighs 20 pounds. Double-edged sword, at least 3.5 feet long, like this. This is the kind of thing, if I swung it, I could take a horse's head off if I got enough of a swing. It's not like the kind the Knights of Columbus use. Those are nice ceremonial swords, but they won't, not what I have. And I went out on the front porch that night when I knew that boy was coming, and I put on the Roman helmet, and I put the sword in the sheath, and my wife pinned a red blanket over my shoulder, and I looked like a Roman centurion with a big red brush on the top, and I hid in the shadows of my front porch. They pulled up in the driveway, and the boy got out, and he came up the steps, and I could see it in his face. I've got to go talk to that old bald-headed guy. As soon as he got to the top of the steps, I pulled the sword out, and I pushed that kid against the brick wall of my house. I said, Matthew, are you ready to die for Jesus Christ right now? If not, you're not ready to be confirmed. If you're not ready to die for Jesus Christ, let me know. I'm a busy man. I have no time for you. But I pushed it. The kid, he was just, I can, I will, I do, Mr. Ray. And his parents in the car, you should have seen their eyes. Oh, what? And I brought that boy in and I talked to him about what it meant to be confirmed as a young man in the Catholic Church. That if you're not ready, like the Jewish boy who has his bar mitzvah and he's ready now to die for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and when they come marching him in under a canopy to the Western Wall, which I've seen 100 times, that boy, I dare you to try and convert him away from Judaism after he's been marching through the streets of Jerusalem with his family, and he goes and reads the Torah scroll for the first time. And I brought this boy in and I told him that if you are going to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, you too better be ready to die for the God of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, or don't you dare have the chutzpah to walk up that aisle and be confirmed. He told everybody, his parents said for the next year, about how Steve Ray almost killed him with a sword. But the kid, even to this day, never forgot what it meant to be confirmed and to be a Catholic. Maybe we have to be a little drastic with kids sometimes. Maybe every parish should have a sword. I don't know. But I think that's one story about we got to reach our kids with what Christianity and the Catholic Church really is. Confirmation is not a party where you wear white dresses and you have a fancy dinner afterwards. The next story is about my son, Jesse. And he learned from me that you always, every time you can, you find a teaching moment in everything you do. Use it to teach things. So he took his kids swimming in our pool. We just had one of those cheap above ground pools, like 20 feet across or something. And he said to his kids, if we get in this pool and we go around and around together, we can make a big whirlpool. And we can make, the water will go down in the middle and it'll splash over the sides. And the kid said, yeah, right, Dad. Right. He said, let's do it. So we got all the kids in the pool, and they started going around and around. Well, not much happened at first, you know. But pretty soon they noticed there was a current going, and pretty soon it got faster and it got faster. And the water was splashing out the side, and they thought it was so cool that this really was. And then my son said, okay, guys, let's pretend this is the world. And the world is trying to force us to go in its direction. It's trying to get us to accept abortion and atheism and LGBT and all the other things that the world's trying to force us to do today. It's trying to make us go along with its worldview and abandon our own. So why don't we turn around and swim upstream? And so they turned around and they started to swim against the world. They were going against this false worldview, and it was hard because the water was pushing them. And little Sammy says, I can't go anymore, I'm tired. And Maria Faustina said, Sammy, swim, swim, you don't want to go to hell, Sammy, swim. And they all kept going, and they were exhausted, but guess what? They got the water going the other way. And my son's lesson was, if we all work together, even though the world is strong and it's pushing us and it's hard, if all of us work together, we can get the thing going the other way again. And that's exactly what the early Christians did. They didn't give up. They kept going against the stream. They kept following the truth. They kept speaking about it and living in it and even dying for it. And guess what happened? The whole world turned Christian. And how do we do the new evangelism today? You don't need a bunch of documents. It's very simple. Love Jesus Christ and His church and do it. And live it, and be ready to die for it if you have to. The last story is after I was thinking about these things, how am I going to share? How do I want to talk to people? What do I do? And I thought of this illustration. I was laying in bed and I thought of this, that I was standing in the waiting room of heaven, and the judgment seat, God was sitting up there. And He was calling people in one by one. And there's going to be a judgment someday, folks. You're going to stand before God. And your name better be in the book of life. If you don't think that's true, read the last few the chapters of Revelation. There's going to be a judgment, and there's going to be a book of life. And I know darn well I want my name in that book. So I hear my name, Steve Ray. I walk into the judgment room, there's God. Let's see if your name's in the book of life. Ah, yes, R-A-Y, there it is. Welcome into the joy of the Lord, thou good and faithful servant. Whew. I step aside, and there opens a door, and these beautiful creatures come out with music and smells that I could never have imagined. They're coming down these steps, and they start to escort me up into wherever they came from, heaven. And then I hear God say, Jim Smith. And I say to the angel, just a minute, that's my friend, Jim Smith. I sat next to him in a cubicle at work for 30 years. We lived next door. We had 4th of July together. Jim Smith. Let's see if your name's in the book of life. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. Your name is not in the book of life. And then a door opens on this side. And these evil creatures come out of this door with smoke and hideous screams and cries, and they grab him with the hooks on their wings, and they start to take him into that door. But he sees me going in that door, so Jim says, just a minute. Steve Ray, why are you going in that door and I'm going in this door? I said, well, Jim, it's because I'm a Christian. I was baptized and confirmed. I lived in the heart of the church. I believed in Jesus Christ. I did my best to obey him. And when I fell short, I came to see the priest and I went to confession. And I lived for Jesus Christ. Wait a minute. You tell me you knew all of this and you never said anything to me? I said, well, Jim, I knew you had your own way of thinking. I knew you didn't want me to impose my morals on you. I was being politically correct. I was being ecumenically sensitive. I didn't want to offend you. And my friend Jim, as he's taken off into hell, is going to say, damn you, Steve Ray. And I and my family have pledged that no one's ever going to say, damn you, Steve Ray, at the end of time. I may not do it well, but I'm going to do everything I can to talk to people about Jesus and his church and to let them know what I believe. Why do you think I wear this cross? I don't like jewelry. I'm the kind of guy, you watch my movies, I wrestle snakes, I ride camels. I don't wear jewelry. But I wear this because it's beautiful, and I find that every single day somebody makes a comment about it, and it gives me an opportunity to share with them, or at least gives an opportunity to open a conversation. One time we were at the airport. Most of my stories are from the airport. This young man, probably 30-some years old, came up and said, oh, that's beautiful. I said, well, thank you very much. My standard reply is, thank you very much. I wear it proudly as a Catholic. I want everybody to know. I don't say what I believe. I say I want everybody to know what I know is true. He said, oh, so you believe it? I said, yes, I do, enough to die for it. And I smiled, and he goes, he was all flustered, and he walked away. He ended up sitting next to me on the airplane. This is what my wife and I call a divine appointment. He put his headphones on, and I was listening to a podcast on my iPhone, and then I get a tap on my shoulder after the plane's in the air. He says, do you have a minute? I said, yes. He said, you really believe it, don't you? I said, oh, yes, I do. He said, I'm an atheist, and I have absolutely nothing to believe in. Would you take a few minutes and explain to me why I should be a Christian? And I had him for 2 hours. Only because I wore this. Every single day something happens. Just 2 days ago, I was in South Carolina, and I was at a secular school, and the receptionist said, oh, that's beautiful. She said, that's from Assisi, isn't it? I said, yes, it is. She said, I have something like that on my Christmas tree. She said, where did you get it? I said, well, I lead Catholic groups. She goes, oh, you're a Catholic? I said, yes, but I'm a convert, knowing that there's only 2% of Catholics in South Carolina. There's a Baptist church on every street corner. She goes, a convert from what? I said, Baptist. She goes, oh, you're kidding. And she wanted me to tell her and give her information. I always carry my little brochure with information about the Catholic Church, and I said, here. And she said, thank you so much. Every single day, almost every single day, I get a conversation. One time when I gave this talk, I suggested, like my wife said, that when we get up in the morning, we should put our antennas up. Like a bug with his antennas up. What we should do is say to God, I want you to bring 2 people today to talk to about the Lord. I don't know how it's going to happen or why they're going to come or what the circumstances, but I want to at least talk to two people. Sometimes it's just a God bless you or a Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. No, ma'am, it's Christmas. It's about Christ. Merry Christmas. Or it's somebody commenting on my cross. Or my wife opened the door for an elderly lady who had her arms full of groceries. And the lady said, "Oh, thank you." And my wife says, "You're welcome. We're Catholics and we love to help people." And you don't need to be a convert to do that. And you know what? 99% of the people, you're afraid to do that because you think they're going to get upset. But 99% of the people will say, "Thank you. I'm a Christian too," or "Thank you, God bless you, Merry Christmas. Just try me and see if I'm not telling you the truth." Maybe not in Portland, I don't know, but most of the rest of the world. So when I did this, a lady told me, she said, "Steve, after you said that," she said, "I started to pray every day and say, God, bring two people into my life that I can talk to about you." And she said, "My life has been so exciting. Cannot tell you what a thrill it is to get up in the morning, because everywhere I go, I'm wondering, is it him? Is it her? Is it him?" And every single day, there's been two people that the opportunities come up. They've asked me a question. And she said, "I've talked to two people a day for every day this month." She said, "I've never had so much fun in my life." So that's a challenge to you. We've got to have to work together if we're going to get the pool water going the other way. We're going to have to not be silent anymore. We're going to have to live the faith and be willing to die for it if we have to. And I have enjoyed talking with you all, and thanks for having me, and God bless you. Let's just close in prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you've given us such a beautiful Savior who came down from heaven to redeem us from our sins. But you also gave us a commission to go out and tell other people about this wonderful Redeemer. Give us the courage and the grace and the love to do so. Give us the wisdom, how and when, and help us do all that we can, not just for our own families, but for the people around us, to bring a whole lot of people to Christ and to the church and to change our culture again. And if not, to be willing to die for you if we have to. We pray it all in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.